from these CVs, there is absolutely no way I can tell whether someone's going to be any good.
You know, are CVs dead? Well, if they're not, maybe they should be.
Can they do the job in your context?
And how many hours do you think most companies spend on recruiting an important candidate?
Are they curious?
Yeah.
And are they coachable?
So what's new? See the way I did that? Throw that over
You
to
just threw it straight over to me.
Yeah, you thought, normally you're the one that normally starts the pre-episode chat.
I've exhausted my repertoire of dad jokes.
Well, hang on, we only heard one.
Well, that's about it, to be fair. And I've also been told not to do it again.
Don't say your children listen, then we're so embarrassed.
No, but I did mention it, and
they said, don't ever say that joke again,
You're such
Dad.
a cringe boomer. That's what I was.
Exactly.
I had to protest that I'm
right.
well and truly Gen X, well, on the cusp. Zennial.
Well, right. You had a teenager birthday last week, didn't you?
I did indeed. So, well, second one actually. So
yeah, scary.
There we go, scary stuff. But they went to see Six
the musical.
Six the musical, wife and daughter. Not my cup of tea.
Yeah, well, I'm going tonight.
Yeah.
I've seen
cultured
on YouTube. Yeah,
cultured.
Our family are quite into the musical thing.
Are they?
They're into musicals. Not trendy. Not at all trendy.
I remember watching Sweeney Todd, the movie,
right,
and not realising until we were sort of 10 minutes into it that there'd been 2 songs already, and I thought, oh my goodness,
it's a musical.
It's a musical.
Yeah,
I've been done. I'm not a big fan of musicals.
There can be better done ones.
Other than I must say, there is a guy on Instagram who does. He takes films, so I saw one recently, Conan the Barbarian.
Right.
And he turns them into musical. So he takes the dialogue and puts it into a musical. So there's,
that's worth looking up.
Nothing quite like watching.
Have you not even, like Hamilton or something? I think that's probably one of the standout musicals of the decade. I'm not into the Mamma Mia stuff, I get that. That's just too cringeworthy. But some really well done ones. Or Billy Elliot, did you ever do that? Make that film?
I've seen Billy Elliot. That's not a musical, though, is it?
It's a stage musical.
So I watched it. They did it at school, so I watched that. But
that's some great ones. So Six, what's the reviews of Six the musical then?
They loved it. Said it was really good.
Yeah. It's unusual in that there's no interval. It's quite short, isn't it? Hour and a half. Hits you with it. Bang, bang.
I had to listen to the soundtrack on the way home after we did pick up. So, a bit racy, I thought.
A bit racy. Bit too much for you.
A bit too much for me. I thought, what's this?
Okay.
But I was worried though. I did say that if I get too close, I might end up on stage.
You feel that there might be some typecasting?
Sometimes I am.
Are you accused?
Accused, or not accused, maybe confused.
Confused?
With a certain English monarch that had
500 years apart. But still.
The reincarnation of Henry.
I'm sure that episode we did last year of the Shakespeare one, where Verity dressed us both up in our Tudor costumes with a bit of post-production editing. You did come across as a little bit Tudor in that.
Tudor-esque.
Right, should we do a podcast?
Yeah.
Good. Save us from this madness. Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast. Here we are, episode Scrabbling Papers 109. Can't believe it, 109 this week. So here we are from Wellmeadow, coming up with some other interesting and useful stuff for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises. And this week we thought we'd talk a little bit about the thorny subject of recruiting the right people. The recruitment process, but from the recruiter's point of view. But I think we'll probably throw a few bits of perspectives in there for the applicant's point of view as well.
Yep.
So, got Rich with me.
Hello.
That's another one of your suggestions this week. I think you picked it up somewhere. You saw some article about CVs.
There's been a few things in the news, haven't there, about people's CVs.
Rachel Reeves is having a bit of a tough time at the moment in the Times and the BBC. A few pops at her about her accuracy of her CV.
And then you're doing a bit of recruitment work with a client at the moment.
Yeah, I'm helping a board recruit a chief operating officer.
And
so we're going through those interviews.
Chatting to a business owner yesterday, and she was talking that she had a role and that was open, and she had 150 CVs that come in. And so that just got us talking about, okay, well, how do you go about doing recruitment?
How do you do that? And it happened to strike a chord because we used to do a lot more of this, didn't we?
We used to do a bit of that, yeah.
It's one of our service offerings.
We can talk about that, but shall we...
So what did we do? What have we done recently? How did we get here? The last 3 episodes. Can you remember what last week's was? 108.
108 was Dirty Data.
Patrick Swayze starred in that episode.
Dirty Data. So CRMs. Make sure your CRM's clean.
Dirty Data was killing your business.
Exactly.
Week before, 107.
When to Quit, When to Persevere.
That was the one, I don't know whose study it was. It was
Seth Godin's book.
Oh, Seth Godin, that's it, yeah. Dips. Are you in a dip or are you in the cul-de-sac?
Yep.
Knowing when to quit. There's been a mass resignation in the country ever since that episode landed. That was 107, and then 3 weeks ago, 106.
Key lessons from starting a SaaS company. Building a SaaS company.
Inspired by our own personal experiences of launching Magic Minutes on the world as the revolutionary new way of running your board meetings.
So if you want to see two grown men cry, watch that
episode. Yeah, good. Well, hopefully people have all found something useful in all of those. That's good. And if you haven't, then go and check them out on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube. We're still getting a lot of traffic on YouTube, aren't we? Thanks for everybody dialing into that. So this week then, CV. So the whole subject of CVs, I think the first question that came up with was the question of, are CVs dead? Is there any point in a CV anymore anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, I always thought they're pretty rubbish anyway, because you can pretty much write what you want. And it's a bit of a chronological list, really, isn't it? What I've done where in my words.
Was that whole David Brent scene, isn't there, in the office, where he's got
a big pile of them,
he just
takes
splits them in
half
half and never employ an unlucky person.
Throws half in the bin. Yeah. I've quoted that a lot in recruitment processes. Brings grown men to tears, that one as well.
So I think that was the question that was posed to me yesterday, and saying, well, by the time this particular client had got through 20 or 30 odd CVs, you're just, punch drunk from looking at it. You can't. And then what she said, and this is something that we've come back to a number of times in our own business and when we're talking about recruitment to other people, said, from these CVs, there is absolutely no way I can tell whether someone's going to be any good.
Exactly.
There are so many other factors at play.
And yet we convince ourselves that that's what they're for. And clearly they don't.
Yeah.
I don't know what role they've got really in the recruitment process at all. There are such better ways of doing it.
And I don't know, maybe historically, when roles were maybe more linear, maybe 50, 60 years ago, when you came in and you did a job and the actual kind of social contract between employer and employee was a bit more transactional in terms of, or at least the expectation was, in terms of...
Difficult for us to say, isn't it? Because we didn't recruit back in the 70s or 80s. But was it different?
I don't know.
Don't know.
But I think now, at least now, there's so many other factors around, cultural fit. Can they actually do the job? You don't know until they try. Can they do the job in your context?
But that surely was always true. Maybe we talk about it a lot more now. What certainly has changed, a few different things. One is that everyone's online presence exists, let alone is more. 20 years ago, that didn't happen at all, even if it's just someone's LinkedIn profile. Yeah. And is that not pretty much your CV anyway? It's a list of the jobs you've done with some recommendations, a chance for you to highlight your skills, put a little pitch in yourself at the top. That's equivalent. Why does anybody even ask for a CV to be sent in anymore? Just go and have a look at my LinkedIn profile. That's for a start. Everyone's own social media presence outside of that. You may have your work if you're an artist or creative. You may have your examples of your work out there anyway. You may have case studies that you've talked about. You may have published papers. You might be in someone else's case studies or interviews. You might have appeared on someone's podcast.
Yeah.
Now, that's happened before where people have said...
That'll get you the job.
They quote that. Well, only if it's ours. So with all of that going on, and then I think the other main thing that's happening is AI being used in the recruitment process, which is both helpful and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
And if that's being used to sieve CVs, then God help us all, because people are just writing what they want to write. There must be so much bias in that process. So that's a bit scary. But with all that going on, are CVs dead? Well, if they're not, maybe they should be. There should certainly be other things that you're doing that are much more influential. And your case in point, I'm interviewing from this afternoon a series of candidates, final round for a chief operating officer role. So I think I've got 3 candidates got through to the final round. I'm not even being sent their CVs. Yeah. That's quite telling, isn't it?
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened in the past, possibly just because people thought that's what you should do. But there's no benefit. If they've got to the 3rd round, I take it as read that their experience has got them that far in the process. I'm more interested in all these other things we're going to talk about
today. And how much
can
you verify the CV anyway. Like if someone puts their educational history down, you're going to ask for the transcript from the university. You're going to check that they actually went to that school at those times. And
well, I noticed the Weekends thing, or a couple of days ago on the Times, having another pop up, Rachel Reeves with her thing. She claimed to have published a paper in the Journal of Political Economics, and it was apparently it's a very prestigious publication, according to whoever they interviewed, and it was deemed to be a lie because she'd actually published a paper in the European Journal of Political Economics. So one word difference. Apparently much less prestigious. But if you were doing a basic fact check on that, I challenge many recruitment processes and HR departments to have even done the check, let alone to distinguish between whether it was one similarly titled journal or another and whether it mattered or not.
So as someone who has published in peer-reviewed journals,
my learned friend,
we take these things very seriously. You've got to get them right.
I think if you're in science, you do.
I actually turned up to a meeting once, and somebody had downloaded a copy of said publication
of your paper.
Yeah, and said, "We're really interested in this."
Wow.
And I thought, lovely sentiment, but no, you're not, because I'm not even interested in it.
You didn't have to say that.
But no, that's like, I'm not sure I can explain this to you anymore. But there you go. So,
well, I was talking to someone last night, and Brian, if you're listening, thanks a lot for meeting us up, and good to catch up again. But he said his son was recently got an interview and did well in the interview because he'd been giving some talks at some universities, guest lecturing, as someone in their 20s. And that stands out. Yeah. So it's those sorts of things that are probably more likely to get a recruiter's attention than whatever. Even if you put that on your CV, it can get a bit buried in other stuff. So if you could instead come up with a way of summarising why am I different as a candidate, then you've got a much better chance of doing that if you're not forced into the straitjacketed sort of conventions.
Well,
CV
I saw an interesting post on Instagram, and it was slightly inflammatory, as these things are, to try and probably get a reaction and get clicks and whatever. But the chappie was saying there's going to be two things left in 5 years: AI, personal brand. Now, whether or not you believe that or not, it's an interesting thought.
Starter for a discussion,
Particularly around, I think the personal brand thing is important when, your CV was probably post personal brand speak. Your CV was what you put forward to say, this is the best version of myself. Take a look. Whereas now, the personal brand industry is huge. And everything we do, from our social media feeds to LinkedIn to podcasts to how we, kind of present ourselves and whatever, is all part of personal brand. Yeah,
no, true. And I don't think in large parts of the recruitment world that's been acknowledged enough, and maybe people don't work on their personal brand deliberately, but it's there whether you like it or not, especially if you've got a LinkedIn profile. What does your photo look like at the top? How have you structured the banner? The bit that goes behind your photo and your name and stuff. How have you structured everything else in that? That's part of your brand. What posts are you reposting or commenting on? That's part of showing what you care about, right? Yeah. So with so much of that going on, you don't really want to rely too much on this CV thing. And I've even heard people saying recently that they now have CV in their ChatGPT library of their private GPT, and every time they apply for a job, they just say, rewrite my CV to suit that job. Yeah. Which is very good to do if you're doing it longhand and you did it yourself. But if you're just automating that all the time, all you're going to get is a generic CV that says whatever you think that recruiter wants to hear. Doesn't distinguish the candidates too much.
Well, I think it's about cutting through the noise as well, isn't it? There's so much noise now on these CVs. I think everyone's going to be suspicious of a CV. Is it AI generated, and the other way around? Is it going to be assessed by AI and therefore,
or ignored, or David Brent disposed,
yeah. 50-50. So how do you cut through the noise? Yeah. And how do you, what should you look for as a business owner for someone who is actually doing that? Now, we've always been impressed when people have just turned up in person. Yeah. And actually knocked on the door, which is pretty rare.
Well, it's so much more effort from their point of view than not just sending in a CV and an application from wherever, but using these farms that apply to 100 jobs at once at the click of a button. If you've actually turned up and said, can I chat to someone about openings in your business? I mean, my lad got a job once. He turned up, I think it was W.H. Smith's, just a Saturday job, and he said the fact that the manager of the store said the fact that you're the only person that's actually come into the store with a copy of your CV and asked means you got the job. Can you start on Monday? Or whatever it was. So that makes your point entirely. It shows you've put that effort in. And a colleague of mine, John, made a big play of following a hand-picked selection of companies over a number of years and kept in touch, not to ask for a job, but just to comment, ask, engage, being in touch with them. So then when he was looking for his next big break, and he's been multiple CEOs at different jobs, he was able to refer back to this sort of thread of conversation he's had for a number of years and be genuine when he said, I've been following you over a number of years.
It's almost like a pipeline of...
Yeah. Well, I told you that the other day. He used HubSpot, the starter or the free version. He used it to manage his job application process. So he had companies are all in there, all the contacts that he was talking to. He had the pipeline view showing you what stage he was at the various different discussions. He'd logged all of his emails and his calls. It's a selling job, right? You're just selling yourself. So that's perhaps a tip more for the applicant than the recruiter, but a clever way of thinking about it. And if ever you were going to go into a sales role, to say you'd done that even, using maybe not HubSpot, but a CRM, you could say that I believe so much in CRMs that I'm using one for this process.
I've got my own personal CRM that I use for managing my contacts and...
managing my career, not just selling your thing, but selling my thing.
I know. It got me thinking.
You're applying for a number of jobs now. I've seeded that thought. But I thought we could talk a little bit about the process that we developed years ago. And credit to Matt, when Matt used to work for us, he helped us develop this, didn't he? That's a while ago now, 15 years ago. But it stood the test of time. It worked really, really well. Yep. So if we talk now, sort of a few steps that we built around the process there, which really worked very well, and we got tremendous feedback from the clients and the applicants that we worked with.
So I suppose we should probably just go back one step from that. So we were never recruitment consultants. We were never interested in being recruitment consultants. But what we did have was clients that were asking us to get involved in their recruitment processes and help them recruit. And we tried to back them off and say, go somewhere else and find someone who can do that. And they insisted that we do it. So we thought, well, I forget what it is now.
If Carlsberg did recruitment processes,
what would they do?
What it was,
So we came up with a bit of a process, which will be no surprise to anyone that knows us.
Process thinking.
How do we process this?
But it was built on a few core principles. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't just judgment only. We wanted to have something in it which was traceable and comparable. We wanted to make sure we could defend against any potential bias or accusations of bias. We wanted to normalize it as much as we could. We wanted to involve as many people from the recruiting company as we could, so we didn't get only one or two people making the decision. Share the blame, credit. Exactly. And we wanted to adopt a principle which we've seen since described as reverse interviewing, but where you put a lot more onus on the candidate than you do in a situation where you're just pummeling them with questions all the time.
And also, we wanted to make sure that it was very human. So we tried to provide feedback to anybody in the process. Every candidate. Which was a systemised process, but it was still very well received. And we had a lot of feedback saying this was the only recruitment process where someone's actually come back to me, which was...
worked really well.
Pretty
I think the other thing, which has changed over the years a bit and maybe coming back now, but when we first developed that and used it a lot more in the 20-teens, you had a lot more applicants for certain roles. And that's changed just before or maybe during and around COVID, where with the virtually full employment we've got, I think the unemployment rates came out the other day, still stuck at 4.4%, which is regarded as full employment. So you're not getting as many job applicants or haven't been. But that's starting to pick up again now. And I think... And maybe there's certainly news stories that companies are slowing down recruitment or even laying off because of the increase in the employer's national insurance coming up soon. Whether or not you believe that or not, it's sentiment is all. So maybe you are now going to be getting more people looking for roles. So if you have 100 people applying for a job, or the 150 example you gave earlier, we wanted to build a process that could cope with that and wouldn't have the false negatives throwing any babies out with the bathwater.
So should I step through the process?
I think that's about where we are in this discussion.
Okay. And if anybody is interested, this has all been documented in an ebook that is available on our website. And if you can't find it on the website, well, it's on the insights page of our website. If you go to the ebook section, you can get a copy of all this process in all of its glory. But the highlights are...
Or you could just Google Wellmeadow recruitment process, and I reckon that will probably come up.
And if you can't find it, drop us an email and we'll send you a copy.
Great.
So the start of the process was around how do we even attract candidates into the ecosystem.
Yep.
So what we would do with that is help with the job description, person specification, pretty standard stuff. But one thing we did do was get the MD of the company to do a warts and all sort of letter explaining where the company was at, where it was heading to, what the role was involved, all of that type of thing. That seemed to be quite...
That went down so well.
Yeah.
The amount of candidates that said, my goodness, I've actually had a letter which is honest, not just advertising the role, but being honest about some of the challenges that we've got, which is why we need this person.
Yeah. So that was around setting the expectation. There's no point, if you've got challenges, which every company has, there's no point trying to fluff over those just to, and actually I think some candidates really like that. Oh, right, there's something for me to get my teeth into here. I can fix that. I can.
Well, and the smarter candidates would then respond to those points in what they say next. The less smart candidates, and therefore already looking less good, are those that give their usual patter. And the smarter candidates would then respond to those points in what they say next. The less smart candidates, and therefore already looking less good, are those that give their usual patter.
So then people we'd send that out, post it, various job boards, etc. CVs come in. What we would then do is, before we really looked at the CV, we send everybody a link to a questionnaire, which we use Typeform for. And there was probably, 20 to 30 questions on there that would range.
It wasn't trivial.
That would range from just general kind of background information about experience, skills, rate yourself out of 10 on, how good are you at sales.
Referring to the points made in the job advert, right? So if it says we want X years of experience or experience in this industry, it asked those questions again to make sure that someone was confirming that.
And then we would put in a bit of numeracy and literacy testing, which was that always yielded some really interesting results, to be fair.
Yeah.
And then just the standard kind of, are you a disqualified director? Have you got the right to work?
They've got driving license.
That type of jazz. And a bit around salaries and travel to work, commute times, that type of thing.
Yep.
So once we had all of that data.
And in it was your video ask innovation. That was in the question.
Yes, was that in the first round?
I think it was. You can't tell.
Yeah.
What's video ask?
So video ask is an adjunct product to Typeform where you can do a kind of one-to-many interview question. So you record yourself asking a question. So, I don't know, tell me a bit about your experience of selling SaaS products or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then the respondent can video themselves giving you that. So it's more, sometimes it's conversational because it's one-sided.
It's asynchronous.
Asynchronous. But it's a really good way to get a feel for someone's answers, and particularly if they're going to be in a sales role, how do they come across?
But even if not, if someone's got to answer for themselves or present themselves or project in some way, you're seeing the whites of the eyes, you're seeing them talking. They get to rehearse it. They can, when they're recording it, they can record it again. They don't have to go for the first attempt.
So it just helped build a more holistic picture at that point. So then what we would do is we had all those results from the Typeform questionnaire stage we put those all into a spreadsheet with an algorithm.
A scoring solution of some sort.
Yeah. Sum it up. And then we would take the top 10, 15 candidates.
That produced a long list, didn't it?
Long list. And from that, we would review, often with client, the CVs, look through the scores, look through what we're looking for. And that would then result probably in about 10 or so Zoom interviews.
Yeah, so that was to thin the long list down to the short list.
So those interviews would then focus more on kind of, I suppose, just checking what was on the CV, bit of validation in there.
Yeah. At each stage in the process, we were working out whether
we were finding out a piece of information for the first time, or whether we were verifying what someone had said previously. And so this Zoom interview was a way of verifying those questions to make sure they deserved their place in the long list. Yeah. And you can still have a bit of shuffling at the end of that. But the idea is you're turning your 10 to 15 that scored well into a handful. What we're talking,
we were looking to get 4 or 5
on a short list.
6 to a short list. And then one of the things we did do with those interviews as well was we took the transcript of them. This was way before AI was popular. We were way ahead of our time. So ahead of time. Way before anyone had even heard of Grok, let alone Grok 3.
You just lost half the audience.
Name dropping. But no, so we actually took some of those answers and ran it through another algorithm. And
I keep saying that with a silly voice.
Because it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's one of those misused words that's just kind of like, it's like strategy, isn't it? Just to put strategy on the end of anything. But we ran it through an algorithm and just an AI piece, just to see whether we could get sentiment analysis off it. When they're talking about their old ex-employers, how are they talking? Or their current employers, how are they talking? Are we getting a negative sentiment, positive sentiment? And the answers were complete rubbish. But
at the time they were. I would wondered though if you did that again.
If you did it now,
and you correctly prompted what you now use AI a bit more. I think back then it was giving you a score without all the wordy stuff, and then you can get.
Well, I think what it was based off was the AWS model, and I think they were using sentiment for product reviews,
right?
Whereas I think if you've got 500,000-600,000 product reviews where everyone's going, this is amazing, this is rubbish, whatever, you can aggregate that to get the sentiment. Our sample size was way too small, but it was just kind of, this is interesting thinking, how do we apply some of this stuff? So anyway, we get our short list of 4 candidates, and then at that point we're saying, okay, we want to bring you to an assessment center. So this was where we would have 4 key components to that. One was a behavioural interview, so asking for kind of how would you respond under certain situations, and oftentimes we were tying those questions back into either a personality test, and that was the other thing we did. So before we invited people to a assessment centre, we had them do a personality test, and oftentimes then we would map that against what the existing team, they'd all be personality tested as well.
Looking for fit.
And there was often on that point, there was a lot of pushback from some hard-nosed manufacturing bosses. Names would be protected.
Available.
But actually, once they got the results, there was an awful lot of insights. And
there's a health warning there, because the providers of these personality profiles, and we use Insights as an example, they always say you shouldn't use these profiles in an interview or selection process. For a start, it's open to bias, it's self-scoring and all that sort of thing. And I get that. But the reason it did work so well for us is it prompted the right debates internally to say, well, who are we to start with? What gaps have we got? But it also gave the opportunity in an interview to go through the points that it raised. So you'd never assume that the results from the personality profile were correct. You just say, according to your answers, it's this random algorithm says you are, good at this, bad at that. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
And it was a great feeder of topics that were worth discussing in an interview.
So the basic setup then for assessment centre was we get 4 or 5 people to come along. Candidates. And we would try and get then as many people from either the board or within the business to attend as well.
I suppose whatever's relevant based on the recruiting groups, the future peers and bosses and maybe subordinates.
So we'd kick that all off with a bit of a spiel from the MD, and then a tour around factory or facilities or whatever it was.
Offices,
Try to give everybody a kind of the same.
But they'd be going around together.
Quite
interesting to watch the dynamic and who asks questions on the way around and how comfortable they are. Now, once again, we got a bit of pushback on that in the early days. They thought, well, for these senior roles, are you really wanting to put all the candidates for the role in a room at the same time to meet each other? Doesn't that sound a bit like a graduate training program type thing? And yet the experience has shown through doing it that it was phenomenally powerful. And candidates don't mind in the least. No. They actually quite like to see who they're up against, and that it's just all ordinary, normal people like them. And there's this interaction you get and a bit of valuable information you get from that early bit while they're all together. So it did work.
So that, and then we would normally split it down into 4 sections. So there would be the behavioural interview where we go through the insights profile, as you said.
You mean 4 different interview sessions?
4 different interview sessions. So there'd be a behavioural interview. There would be a kind of CV interview, just going through the CV, asking some questions, clarifying some points, normally around salary, that type of thing. Commute distance, that was always a big one. Someone turned up to an assessment centre and they lived, 700 miles away or something. There would then be a case study that we would normally set beforehand and get them to then do a presentation, talk through something relevant to the role. And then we had a numeracy and literacy test, which was always slightly controversial and yet yielded some rather shocking results.
In roles where it's needed, especially.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
I think we had a role once for finance director and half of them pretty much failed the numeracy test. Yeah. So, but the way that we also started adding in things, which I think was quite interesting. So we did some recruitment once for sales managers, sales directors. And one of the things that we wanted to test for that was, are they curious?
Yeah.
And are they coachable? They were kind of two things that
Yeah.
we were looking for to see, because we wanted to mold the team. So we did a couple of things where we left industry magazines one industry magazine on the table, made sure everyone had to wait before they came in for the interview. And there was just loads of really obvious messages within that magazine that we'd written in, or kind of on pieces of paper stuck in.
Yeah.
Just kind of, tell us the word banana or something when you come in, just to show that you'd read the thing. Are they cute? That's what you want your salespeople to be doing, right? You go into a company, prospect, and you have a look through the industry magazine, flick through, find something useful. The other thing we did was there was an interview room that we had, and there was just a garden spade against the wall. Did they ask a question? Why is there a garden spade there? Actually, it was a product the company was developing for someone else.
Yeah, shows curiosity.
So those sorts of things about curiosity, and then coachability. We once had the MD sort of tell them about the business and tell them about his sales process, and we wanted them to say, okay, your job now is to design a sales process based off what you've heard.
Yeah.
How much of that did they incorporate? And we had deliberate things. So
another thing we did as well, I remember for our one, is to, rather than asking people, have you looked at our website? And there's only ever going to be one answer coming back to that question, right? Yeah, of course we have looked at it. At the bottom of the careers page, where you may be talking in detail about other culture and so on, it says something like, if you're applying for a job for us and you're coming to an interview, please bring a copy of our accounts downloaded from Company's House, which is free, and anybody can do it. And then in the interview, you didn't even have to ask. Either people produced it straight away or they didn't. Yeah. And then it shows you whether they actually...
Our version of the brown M&Ms.
The brown M&M on the contracts for whoever
Status
it was.
Quo, wasn't it? I think.
Was it? I'm not sure if it's been attributed to a number of different rock bands with heavy stage sets, but the point was to check that someone had read the contract.
Yeah.
And so then, have you read our website? Yeah. Did you look at the careers page about our culture? Yeah, I looked at that. Did you see at the bit at the bottom about asking you to bring something along to the interview? I'm not sure I did.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all those sorts of things.
So yeah, all of this is documented in great detail in the ebook.
I think the other main point about that, this is why we call it the assessment centre, is that those 4 sessions happen serially with only a few people from the recruiting teams in each one, and it's a round robin affair. So the candidate sees one after the other, but they're all seeing them in a different order. Yeah. And the recruiter teams see 4 candidates, one after the other, but once again, all in a different order. But you see them all in a very condensed space of time, all in a morning, let's say. So by lunchtime, the candidates are all asked to leave. Sometimes they even put a plate of sandwiches on, if they've got journeys to go to, and that's another opportunity to spot people interacting and that sort of thing. And then the recruiters are all together, all maybe half a dozen or more, who've all sat in different aspects of it but seen the same 4 candidates. And they can talk about it while it's all really fresh in their minds. And that's something we found in other processes really lacked, that if interviews were spaced out by days or even a week or two, to really honestly compare them one to another became very difficult, because one's memory... recollections may vary.
Yeah, and to that point, we'd always try and have 2 people in every interview.
Yes.
So that we kind of eliminating as much bias as possible, and everybody was scored against the same criteria. Yeah. So that we could then compile all those scores at the end and actually come up with a number, which wasn't necessarily the one that the number's more of a guide. Was there a clear outlier or winner or something? But it was just a way of trying to get people's thinking focused on what we should be looking for with each candidate.
And that was also quite instrumental in being able to give that feedback that you talked about. So any one of those 150 can come back and say, why didn't I get the job? And I think the key point, I used to write lots of these, and the key point I always used to make is not that you weren't good enough for the job, or that someone else was better for the job. But I always used the language that the way you presented, the way you interviewed, the way you answered the questions made it look as if you weren't as ideally suited to the job. And I made the point, it could be that you were the perfect candidate, but by answering these questions the way you did, it meant you were scored down on such and such, or when you were challenged on this, that didn't strike. So it's trying to give people encouragement to say that don't feel that you were never going to get this job, but think about your interviewing skills and the answers that you give and the prep that you do.
So that was pretty much the process.
Yeah, there was some reference taking at the end and all that. And even where you talked about the case studies, they had mixed success depending on how real they are. The problem with giving somebody a case study before the event and then they turn up with it is you don't really know whether it's their work or not.
Yeah.
And we suffered that problem internally here, where we had someone come along with a brilliant case study on how they were going to select a new phone system for us, and it turned out that they hadn't written it themselves, but we only found that out after we recruited them.
Yeah.
So there's a weakness of that. And I think the other bit that we talked about as alternative approaches around this, that's a pretty robust system, and you can still tailor those sections. But even now, we find that the process of getting people in some other way to do a work trial has worked out to be more successful. Yeah. So maybe you get to the point, and this isn't necessarily suitable for all roles, but if you get to the point where someone can take some holiday, or they've got some anyway, or they've got flexibility in their work, and they can come and actually sit in your offices for half a day and do something, or ride along on a sales call if that's the job, or do an actual task. So that can be useful. You mentioned as well, just a closing thought on Pitch Me. Just wanted to cover that off. I think you'd seen Steve Bartlett
talk about that, and just rather than have a CV, almost treat it as if you were pitching for an investment. Yeah. Which in one way you sort of are. Yeah. And so what would a pitch deck look like in terms of, rather than a CV, how would you pitch someone? Have you worked on your sort of elevator pitch, as it were, even for why someone should?
Would you say that would not be as fair, let's say, for roles where you didn't have to present and pitch? Are you testing their pitching abilities as opposed to their fit for the role?
Interesting.
But if you're in a sales role, a marketing role, anything where there's persuasion involved, or a senior leadership role generally, I would say that it is relevant, whatever the job discipline.
Because whatever you're doing, you're going to be outwardly facing. You're
even if it's your team, right? To get your team to follow you and all that. Yeah.
So yeah, and I think it's almost the thinking process behind the pitch is probably more important than the pitch itself. Yeah. Rather than just
so be careful not to measure too much on delivery if it's content and vice versa. Yeah, so there's lots of tips in there. So as you say, this is all documented well enough in an ebook, but just rattling off those 10 steps that you just talked about, which is scary enough. People are just test if people are listening. Make sure you write the ad properly so that you're attracting the right candidates in the first place. Have a letter written from the MD, which is honest about the needs of the role in particular. A self-assessment questionnaire with type form. Embed something to do with video ask in there, or something to get someone recording themselves giving some answers on it. Then we score the results. Scoring of that comes to a long list. The long list gets a Zoom interview. Zoom interviews get scored as well. We then put a bit of sentiment analysis on the transcript. That produces a short list. The short list then gets sent a personality test link so they can do that. They all get invited to an assessment centre. And there's 4 or 5 stations on that they all round robin. Scoring by different members of the recruiting company, minimum of 2 at a time. Make the decision on the day. Take references. Start next week.
Bish, bash, bosh.
You make it sound so easy.
So easy. Well, I think it's definitely not easy. It's probably one of the hardest things you can do. And I think the
How many hours do you reckon how many management hours did that process take?
About 100.
We worked it out about 100.
And
how many hours do you think most companies spend on recruiting an important candidate? So I bet you it's nowhere near 100.
No. But I think this is going to become more and more important to make sure you've got the right people on the team, because the way that things are going, particularly in the UK, is just becoming more and more problematic for.
Well, we've got these new rules coming in next year, haven't we, about probation periods and the day one rights and so on. So that's what you're referring to, isn't it? You've got to make sure more than ever that you spend a lot more time before you've contractually committed to taking somebody on. Because there's a lovely warm feeling when you recruit somebody, and everyone's very happy and no one's going to object.
Everyone's in sales mode.
And yet when you've worked out that it was the wrong hire, a misfit, and you've got to unwind the position, everybody gets very upset and nobody wants to do it, and it costs you a lot of money. So, good lessons in all of that.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Good topic, actually.
It's all right.
Good. I know we've done a lot of work on it before, but we've never talked about it.
No.
It's funny. We've come across this a few times. Did we do that once? We did. So if you're interested, go and have a look at the website, or as I say, Google the Wellmeadow recruitment process. Go and have a look at the insights page at Wellmeadow.co.uk, and you'll be able to download an ebook and learn all about it. Get in touch. You never know. And maybe even if you're applying for jobs, use HubSpot as a way of tracking your applications. That might sound quite interesting to your next potential employer. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast. That was episode 109. And hopefully that you found something interesting in that. If not, we told you what our previous 3 episodes were. So go and look some of the back catalogue or Google around on our channel on YouTube and see what other useful stuff we've been putting on there. Please share the word with colleagues of yours and anybody else you know in business. And in the meantime, good luck with your business.